Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Friday, August 29th, 2025 episode of On Iowa Politics. This week on the podcast, just how special were those special election results? The Quad Cities felt the burn. We talk about Ashley Hinson's fundraiser and Iowa Democrats possibly going rogue. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week, our Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief, Tom Barton. Hello, Tom.
Hey.
Tom, feeling good. His Cyclones are already 1-0 before most teams have even kicked off.
Go Clones.
Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is here. Hello, Sarah.
Good afternoon, Erin.
We have Jared McNett, who's had a busy week at the Sioux City Journal. Hello, Jared.
I don't know if I'll have that much to talk about, Erin.
Yeah, we're really scraping the barrel to get Jared involved this week. And we have our columnists as well. Gazette columnist Althea is here, also a Cyclone fan. Hello, Althea.
Huge Cyclone fan. As the resident conservative in this group, I would just like to say that I totally skipped the Ashley Hinson barbecue bash so that I could watch the Farmageddon game, and I have zero regrets.
And Gazette columnist Todd Dorman is with us. Hello, Todd.
Hello.
All right, we're going to start this week with the results from that special election for a state house seat in western Iowa. Iowa Democrats flipped a previously Republican-held seat, trimming the GOP's expansive majority in the chamber. Jared, tell us about the impacts of this special election outcome, both real and perceived.
All right, so I'm going to start with a little preamble, if that's okay, for the good of the order. And I was saying this on Tuesday before the election results started coming in. When I had a feeling about how things might go was Monday. I'm off on Mondays, but I was still checking Facebook. And I had seen that the Woodbury County Republican Party had a post up clarifying rumors about the residency of their candidate, Christopher Proch. So that was the day before the election, when you're really supposed to be having your closing message, and they were having to play defense on something like that, which did not seem like a good sign. So that was the first marker I kind of had about Tuesday. And then the second one was, and I know this got talked about leading into election day, was the absentee ballots. There were about 200 more received ballots from Dems going into election day on Tuesday. So yet again, that was something that the Democrats were strong in, was absentee voting. And the total margin for just the election in general was 797 votes. The difference in the absentee ballots was 573. So that had a big impact. And then once the results started coming in, and they came in very fast, credit to the Woodbury County Auditor's Office for that. The last marker for me was one of the precincts, Leeds Elementary. Christopher Proch, the Republican, won by less than 1%. And when Rocky DeWitt won in 2022, he won that same precinct, although there were two polling places, so the math is a little different. He won that same precinct by about 14%. So instead of winning by 14%, the Republican Christopher Proch only won it by 1%. And in the places he won, that's what happened over and over again, whereas Drey had a much larger margin with absentee voting, and then in a few key districts. A number that popped up everywhere on Tuesday was 11%. That's what Rocky DeWitt won by in 2022. That's what Trump won by just last year in the district. And that's about what Drey ended up winning by on Tuesday, was 11%. Actually, one of the precincts basically ended up being almost exactly 11% in terms of the difference between Drey and Christopher Proch. And Rocky DeWitt had won that same precinct by 11%. So that came up over and over again going through the results. And then the last thing before I get into your question, Erin, is the money in the race, which there was a lot of it for an off-cycle special election. Christopher Proch had 24 contributions of between $1,000 and $100,000 through August 16th. The two largest ones were from the state party. One of those was $75,000, and the other one was for $24,500. Drey had one contribution between $10,000 and $100,000, and that was from a DC based PAC. And then she had 13 contributions between $1,000 and $10,000. I think, if I remember right from my story, 8 of those were from outside of the state, and then a couple were from outside of the district, and then the other 2 or 3 were in the district. But she had way more contributions of $1. If you go through the filings on that page, it's dollar after dollar after dollar after dollar after dollar, which I know campaigns really like getting those kinds of donations because they're easy and they can keep coming in over and over again of $1 here and $1 there.
Before you go on, and get to the other parts, I want to say really quick. Well, I want to ask another question. Are you wearing khakis? Because that precinct level analysis was Steve Kornacki-esque. That was, somebody get this guy a touchscreen. That was brilliant.
Well, I had a little bit more time on my hands Wednesday than I did Tuesday night.
I loved it. In all seriousness, that was great. But it gave Kornacki, as the kids would say.
Also, unlike him, I suck at math, so it's very stressful printing out the canvas from 2022 and then looking at the results from Tuesday night and checking the margins for each one of those. Not the most fun thing to be doing.
I get it.
But yeah, then now to actually what your question was about. What it means, one of the things I wrote in my second day story that's out today is that yet again, Dems are overperforming in 2025 what Harris and other top of the ticket Dems did in 2024. I couldn't find anything more recent than April, although I'm sure it exists, from a national story talking about special elections. But through April, NBC News had a story that there were 16 special elections at that point throughout the country, different levels of government, be it these kind of state races or congressional races, whatever. And I think it was 13 out of 16 or 14 out of 16. Dems way overperformed what happened in 2024. Of course, here in Iowa, including Caitlin Drey's victory on Tuesday, we've now had 3 districts that went double digits for Trump, reversed by at least 10 points or more in the Democrats' favor. And Democrats have picked up 2 of those now, Mike Zimmer and now Caitlin Drey. And then what was the one in House District 100, the Republican whose name I'm forgetting now, and I feel bad about that, only won by 1%. He still ended up winning, but it was still a big shift in Dem's direction. So yeah, one thing you can take away is, at least in this current moment and in this current environment, is if you have a district that's even maybe R plus 20, it's winnable for Democrats if the conditions are right. And I think in the more immediate term, not the short term necessarily, is this gives them a reason to spend and invest in more places.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And I haven't, forgive me for bringing this up without having done the homework on it. I feel like Democrats had a similar run of success in special elections in the last cycle too, and then in 2024 we saw what we saw. So it'll be interesting to see again if these are a measurement of what might be coming, or if, as we often are cautioned, that they're just one-off instances, not to draw any bigger conclusions from. We'll know in 15 months roughly, but for now there certainly has been a trend.
Yeah. And another thing that is definitely true, and has been true for a while too, much to the chagrin even now of some Republicans, is that if it's an election where Trump is not on the ballot, you're not going to get the same kinds of participation from Republican voters.
Which, and to that's one of the biggest questions we have about 2026, right? Yep.
Right. Well, and the other thing is you have lower turnout, right? And in a special election, I think, and Jared, correct me if I'm wrong, turnout was what, about a quarter, less than a quarter?
Yeah, it was 24%, something like that.
Yeah. And then another thing, Erin, to your question about what does this mean, I think the most immediate thing is that this means that Senate Republicans no longer have a supermajority in that chamber. So that means that Senate Republicans would need at least one Democrat to join them to confirm any of the governor's appointees to state boards and commissions and to state agencies.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the first tangible effect, right? Is come late March, early April next year when you and I are knee deep in the session at the State House and those nominations start coming around. If there's any that are going along party lines, then those are going to get more interesting again. Excellent stuff. You heard him talking about it. Jared covered election night and then a great follow-up analysis piece, which you got a little flavor of here. Make sure you check those out.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of self-aggrandizing, which I would never do. But since we're all locally focused news outlets, any of the national media that only did a story about this after the fact and didn't do any previews or anything else, you can just ignore them completely, and you can just read local or regional. Regional is good too. That's all good.
Support local journalism, people.
In the words of, what is it, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, I second that emotion.
There we go.
But yeah, I found that out when I was doing some research for a column that I wrote back in January or February when they had the Senate district race to replace Chris Cronoyer. I mean, the national interest was remarkably different.
Jared, before we move on from you real quick, you also had another candidate announcement because we had a day that ended in Y this week, so we needed a new candidate in 2026. A new Democrat in the 4th district, right?
Yeah. Yep. That was Wednesday morning. So Tuesday evening into Wednesday morning, good stretch of news. We've been keeping busy this week at the Sioux City office. The newest person to hop in the race is Dave Dawson. And with him getting in the race, we now have 7 people running in the district, 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats. It's safe to say that he's the highest profile Democratic candidate that there's been so far. And that's owed to the fact that he was a 2-term state rep in the 2010s from 2013 to 2017. For the past 18 years, he's been a Woodbury County prosecutor. Locally, people would know him from that, maybe even more than from being a rep about a decade ago at this point. Yeah, just one of the things I was thinking about with this is if he's the one that ends up securing the nominee for the Democrats, it'll be a little bit different than Ryan Melton in 2022 or 2024, who obviously had to work hard, and not the least of which had to work hard just for people to even know who he was. And Dawson won't have to do quite the same amount of work in that respect. And that's not nothing in a campaign when you only have a finite amount of time.
Yeah. And I'm sorry if you said, Jared, forgive me, where is he? Sioux City? Is he
Lawton. So in Woodbury County. Yep.
Okay. Very good. We're going to move on now, as we do from time to time, do our little river to river to skip from the Missouri to the Mississippi, where the Quad Cities hosted Bernie Sanders last weekend. Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont, was in town for his Fight Oligarchy tour back in the state where he was a narrow second twice in the Iowa caucuses. Please don't at me. It's technically true. I understand all the details. Our Sarah Watson was there to cover it. Tell us all about the event, Sarah.
Most of what Bernie Sanders, his main message was that the Democrats really need to focus on working people and working class folks as they're campaigning. And he kind of laid out, his policies. And a lot of us are familiar with those. If you followed him in 2019, a lot of it is familiar. We've got to get corporate money out of politics, raise the minimum wage. Now he says we should raise the minimum wage to $17 an hour, making colleges tuition free, making healthcare available to every person. That was a really big line. His healthcare lines got a lot of applause when he was in Davenport. So yeah, there were a lot of people that turned out. I mean, hundreds of people. It was standing room only in the River Center, which is a pretty big expo hall. People like sitting in the aisles there to hear Bernie Sanders speak. And I spoke with a lot of attendees at the event who were Democrats who were looking for something to hold on to during the Trump administration. And I talked to several people who talked about what they called the depressing news cycles with the Trump administration, and feeling like they wanted Democrats, such as Bernie Sanders, to do something to fight back, and to highlight examples of ways the Trump administration's actions are impacting everyday folks. And he talked about like the big beautiful bill, criticized Mariannette Miller Meeks and Iowa's delegation for voting for that bill, and also criticized the administration's actions on immigration and deporting immigrants who are here illegally. Before he was in Davenport, he was in, just like a few hours before, he was in West Liberty, and my colleague Dave Hodel covered that round table. It was a private event with Escucha Mi Voz and several families from the area who have family members who have been deported or at risk of deportation. And so we've talked before on this podcast about Pascual Pedro, the 20-year-old who was detained during a check-in with Immigration Customs Enforcement and deported. His grandfather told Sanders about how his grandson had no criminal record and was a construction worker who has been here since 13, seeking a better life. And there were other stories as well. There was a family member spoke of Jesus Hernandez, who was shot twice during attempted robbery and was jailed as a material witness, and Noel Lopez, who was arrested on a charge that was later dropped, but ICE has placed a detainer on him. So Sanders took those stories and made some posts on social media afterwards, saying that this is not who we should be deporting. These are folks who are in the country without criminal records, and that. So he was using that as like examples of ways that he believes the Trump administration is overstepping. That's a little bit about Bernie Sanders' visit. I think just overall his themes were, we need to be reaching out to the working class and not just on, during election cycles. And so laid out his vision for how he thinks how he thinks Democratic candidates should be speaking to voters and should be promoting, what kind of plans they should be promoting. And he's been doing tours all over the country promoting what he says are progressive candidates.
And that's perfect, because that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, Sarah. Were there any local candidates there that he, in particular, that he like held this in conjunction with and talked about, or was this just primarily I'm Bernie Sanders, here's what I think kind of event?
Yeah, it was pretty much just I'm Bernie Sanders, and here's what I
Okay.
think. He did have a few union members who spoke ahead of time. And then he also had a woman who, her child is on Medicaid. And so she talked about how the cuts to Medicaid were going to impact her and her family. And so they had a couple of speakers ahead of time that were local, but no local candidates that he endorsed.
And real quick, Todd or Althea, I'll put you guys on the spot here because I didn't plan on asking you this, but I just find that interesting. That seems like a wasted opportunity to me. If you're going to create an event in Iowa and bring literal hundreds of people into this space, and then you have no local Iowa candidates featured or talked about, that I get rallying the base, exciting your supporters kind of thing, but I mean, am I wrong? Am I being unfair here?
Well, no, I don't. I mean, I think Bernie likes to work by himself, maybe. It'd be nice if he and Joe Biden would get together, because then would it be the oligarchy malarkey tour? I don't know. But
Fight the oligarchy and all the malarkey.
And I don't know what candidates would want to appear with him at this point. I mean, he is a socialist, so I mean, if you appear with Bernie Sanders, you're a radical socialist.
You get labeled.
Too.
Yeah.
So
fair point.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know how many. I mean, there are candidates probably that would like to be featured by him, but they may not be the top tier.
The front runners. Yeah. Okay.
Another thing to keep in mind is, if I'm not mistaken, this was organized by the Fighting Oligarchy tour. So this was not a party organization thing. The parties really shouldn't be coordinating with outside groups. But I mean, at the same time, the first thing that kind of popped into my head was the difference between the state party and the national party. Now, national Democrats, they're hurting in their own way. just like state Iowa Democrats are. But going back to the race in Western Iowa for Senate District 1 to succeed the late Rocky DeWitt, I knew that race was going to be lost, and stay with me on this for just a moment. I knew that race was going to be lost by Republicans when I checked the news and I saw a Hill article prior to the race that talked about national Democrats tapping in 30,000 volunteers. And that seems absolutely ridiculous. It's like that number can't be right, but it actually could, because with technology today, you can patch in people from all over the country to do phone calls and text messages for voter turnout. And that is probably the most important part of a campaign. Nothing else you do in a campaign matters if you can't turn voters out. So if they've really got 30,000 people on the phones doing calls and text messages, interestingly, that's not more than the number of eligible voters in that particular district, and it's not even more than the number of registered voters in that district. But 30,000 is, if my checking was correct, as of January 2025 at least, 30,000 is more than the number of active registered voters in that district. So you're talking about a ton of people. That was organized nationally, not necessarily by the state. So even if the state really had kind of a safe inroads to turn local candidates out to this Bernie Sanders event, the fact that they didn't do it still doesn't surprise me, because organizationally speaking, I'm still not so sure about the Democrat Party. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, with the caucus decision a little bit later in this podcast. But there's my 2 cents on the missed opportunity with the Bernie Sanders event.
No,
just
that's good.
Just as a footnote to the get out the vote thing, because I found this very interesting. I think it was Wednesday. JD Schulten had a tweet listing out credit for Caitlin Drey's win on Tuesday, and he had 1 Caitlin Drey, 2 Iowa Senate Democrats, 3 Woodbury County Democrats, and then a whole bunch of dots, a lot of space. And then national groups who are trying to exaggerate their efforts.
Well, and I mean, if those efforts are exaggerated, then that is one of the brightest spots of this whole thing for Iowa Democrats. Because if their contributions are not exaggerated, then one should not expect those contributions to be the same in 2026, because that army of 30,000 volunteers that they supposedly patched in, they're not going to be interested in some race in Northwest Iowa in a red state that Democrats have largely abandoned. They were able to do 30,000 because they had the time and the inclination to, but in 2026, they're going to have a lot more races to focus on than just one.
Right.
One thing I would say, Erin, about the Bernie Sanders thing before we move on is I have found it interesting some of the places he's choosing to hold these events at, because one of the very first ones he did after the election last year was in Omaha. And, he's had this one now in Davenport. He had one, I think, last month in West Virginia, and which is an overwhelmingly Republican state. And even within that, he had it in a small town that went for Trump by about as much as any town or city could go for Trump. So it's been interesting to kind of track some of the places that he has been popping up in.
Next stop, Pizza Ranch.
I do want to see that. I do want to see Bernie Sanders at a pizza ranch.
Or as I call it, Chicken Ranch, because no respectable person goes to a pizza ranch to eat pizza.
The other thing I would say about the Bernie Sanders rally, sometimes with these political events, when there's a big name, you see a lot of people come in from out of state. And you see especially in the Quad Cities, or right next to Illinois, you see a lot of Illinoisans. People from Illinois. And this time, when I went up and talked to people, I talked to a lot of different people, and everybody I talked to lived in Davenport or Eldridge or in the area, which is really unusual for some of these events. When Trump was here, it was a lot of people who had traveled pretty far distances that I kind of came across just in trying to talk to people. But in this case, it's just a lot of local people. And you asked if there were any local candidates there. I should say there were some local candidates in the crowd, but no, Bernie Sanders wasn't and here's my friend so-and-so. It did seem like there were a lot of local people there, which I thought was interesting.
That's part of the reason I hate Trump rallies, because they're so damn long as it is. And then he's got to point out every local dignitary and talk about how wonderful they are. And that really adds some time to the clock. That's more of a personal complaint, but I'm just going to get that out there.
All right. We're going to move on, but stay in eastern Iowa, where Republican Congresswoman Ashley Hinson this past weekend held her annual barbecue bash fundraiser, where she made her re-election campaign official finally. Our Tom Barton was there to cover. Tom, other than what was a widely expected re-election announcement, we just weren't sure for which office. What were the highlights from Saturday's event?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of went as you would imagine. The re-election campaign had a strong emphasis on Ashley Hinson's support and furthering President Donald Trump's legislative agenda. The event attracted a couple hundred supporters, featured speeches from Iowa GOP leaders and office holders, and Missouri GOP Senator Eric Schmidt. So Hinson, who represents Northeast Iowa's 2nd Congressional District, talked about her support of President Trump's legislative agenda and his One Big Beautiful Bill, permanently extending the 2017 tax cuts, supporting his immigration policies, supporting his trade policies, etc. Senator Schmidt praised Hinson for her role in advancing Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill, that comprehensive legislative package that again includes measures to secure the southern border, extend tax cuts, and reduce federal spending on programs like Medicaid. And then in addition to him, you also had Scott Jennings, a Kentucky-based conservative commentator and GOP strategist who appears frequently on CNN, who mixed humor with sharp attacks on Democrats in his speech.
Let me say this about my day job. Being a conservative voice at CNN is like being the designated driver at a craft beer festival. Nobody really wants you there, but deep down they know I'm the only one who's going to get them home in one piece.
He asserted that Democrats were rooting against America and framing Hinson's support for Trump's policies as essential for national prosperity. The barbecue bash, this annual fundraiser and her re-election launch, comes against a backdrop of 4 Democrats vying for the party's nomination to challenge her in 2026. So that includes Democratic State Representative Lindsey James from Dubuque, longtime Cedar Rapids nonprofit leader Clint Tweet Ball, U.S. Army veteran Kathy Dolter, former Dean of Nursing at Kirkwood Community College here in Cedar Rapids, and then former Pine Lake State Park manager Don Primus. And again, Hinson emphasized her unwavering support for Trump and his agenda, and positioned herself as a steadfast ally in Congress, and as we head into the midterms.
Tom, I should note real quick before we move on, I introduced this segment by saying Hinson announced her run for re-election, and we just didn't know which office, and that it's the House. But technically, we're still waiting on one more announcement that could change that, right? I mean, Joni Ernst hasn't made it official yet, and if she decides not to run for re-election, presumably Hinson would have some interest in that.
Right. That's the rumor. That's been the scuttlebutt, but don't have, any clear indications yet as to what Joni Ernst is going to do. I asked her chief of staff, I said, hey, we're hearing these rumors, and you're seeing some reporting out of national media in DC, and their response is, this is the Washington DC rumor mill. No further insights or indication there as to again what Senator Ernst might do, what Ashley Hinson might do. Again, their focus of the moment is on Iowa's 2nd Congressional District and running for re-election.
Yeah. By the way, that rumor mill regarding what Ernst may or may not do here, and analysis has been, I'm trying to think of the analogy. What's something that keeps going back and forth repeatedly until you just want to get off no matter what? Because that's what that's been.
I'm blanking on a good analogy here, but I know exactly what you mean.
The worst carnival ride you can think of, maybe. So I don't want to hear the next one until it's actually from Senator Ernst. You spare me the next rumor, please. Okay, we're gonna bring it home this week with, and this is something new here, something we've never tried before on this podcast, a discussion about the Iowa caucuses. All right. We actually could have covered this last week, by the way, but we were so packed for last week's episode that the topic was relegated to the cutting room floor. So we'll talk about it here today. The news is that the Iowa Democratic Party leaders have expressed the possibility that the party could go rogue, quote unquote, and hold its presidential precinct caucuses first in the nation once again in 2028 after getting relegated in 2024. To the middle of the pack, regardless of what the national party says. I'm not going to go through all the lead up because you all already know that. And if you don't, it's in our reporting, and we're 35 minutes into this thing and we're just getting started. So let's get to it. Todd, start with you. We've talked about this as a possibility, and now Iowa Democratic Party leaders are talking about it as a possibility openly. Is this a fight worth fighting for Iowa Democrats?
Sure, I think it is. I mean, if you look at the Democratic National Committee after what happened last year, I don't think I'd hire them to run a lemonade stand, let alone tell states when they can have their primaries and caucuses and things. If you look at the reasons to do it column versus the reasons not to do it, the reasons to do it column is like long and full of good reasons. And on the other side, I can't figure out what the consequence would actually be for trying it. I mean, candidates might not come. That's a possibility, but I mean, that's always been a possibility. I mean, you've seen candidates skip. John McCain would be one that pops to mind. I don't know why they wouldn't do this. I don't know who would be in the, within the party intelligentsia here that would argue against it. I know not everyone liked the caucuses, but I don't think there's any doubt that, losing them has been a negative for the party. And yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I don't know how far we got to go back, Todd, to find how long this took, but I think we finally found the one thing that you and Jeff Kaufman might agree slightly on.
Yeah, we're simpatico on that. I can't wait to see him and share this with him.
Althea, same question to you. I know you typically are more concerned about what the Jeff Kaufman's crew is doing, but caucuses clearly, as Kaufman often talks about, is something that a lot of times both parties in Iowa feel strongly about. Do you think this is a fight that Iowa Democrats should take on?
Oh, I've been saying for a couple of years now that they should definitely take this fight on. They should. I mean, if the national party says, no, you are not allowed to have your caucuses, bad Iowa Democrats should tell them to go kiss a toilet seat. We're going to do it our way. The thing is, Iowa Democrats, they really, really, really need the caucuses. They need, specifically, they need those first in the nation caucuses. That's not to say that they should do everything the same way. Like that stupid viability test where a candidate has to get, what was it, like 15% in order to be viable. And if you don't get 15%, then your delegates get kicked back out there to, go find another group and
free agency.
Yeah. And well, we're free agents, but we don't want to, we don't want to do any of these candidates. Maybe we'll get other candidates, people who also didn't get the 15%, and we'll form like a group that has 15%, and we'll live to see another round, and maybe we'll get our candidate, back in the running that way. Holy crap, was that wow. I take some time to kind of read into that and see if I can understand it, and just know, believe it or not, I have Democratic friends who participate in the Democratic caucuses in Iowa. And if they can't explain it to me, then it's probably not a good sign that, or it probably doesn't bode well for a non-experienced politically interested person who shows up. Okay, what do I do? Don't do the viability test. Maybe... Maybe do it more like the Republicans do. Sorry, I just went there, but I did. And just do a straight presidential poll, because let's face it, that's why people show up to the caucuses. Once that presidential poll is over and you know who won in your precinct, 99% of the people, they're out of there. A couple stick behind so that they can do the precinct organization stuff, elect precinct representatives, and sign up to be a delegate to the conventions. And if you're watching this podcast and you have no clue what I'm talking about, even though you've gone to a caucus in the past, okay, well, maybe stick around the next time, because if you're really passionate about politics and you really want to get involved with your local party central committee. But like I said, Democrats need the Iowa caucuses. Specifically, they need the Iowa presidential caucuses, and even more specifically, they need the first in the nation presidential caucuses. What is the National Party going to do? Say, we're going to take away half your delegates? Do it. Iowa doesn't have as many delegates to make a big dent nationally as a place like New York or California. So I would call their bluff. Even if they do lose half the delegates, worst case scenario, Iowa gets seen as the rebel state. Iowa and New Hampshire, of course, because, New Hampshire from the beginning has said we're doing what we want to, and we are going to do first in the nation primary. There's a difference between a caucus and a primary. And so if they're seen as the rebels, what does that activate? Us, the chattering class. We're going to be talking about it in the media. And all of a sudden, that's going to get back to the candidates. And that's when Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders are going to be like, I'm Buttigieg and I won Iowa last time. Maybe I shouldn't turn my back on them. And Bernie Sanders is going to be like, I got the most delegates in Iowa last time. Maybe I shouldn't turn my back on Iowa. And if you're confused on how one guy could win Iowa and another guy could get the most delegates, let's not even go down that route.
Yeah, we don't have, that'll take another 42 minutes.
But anyway, to sum up everything I just said, the more rebellious Iowa appears, and again, worst case scenario, the more rebellious they appear, the more attention Iowa gets, and the more obvious it becomes that candidates are ignoring Iowa if they choose to do so. And all of a sudden, these candidates are going to have to make some difficult choices. Now, they may all decide, heck with Iowa, I don't need Iowa that much, but maybe they might find out the hard way that that's not correct. My final point would be this. If candidates start coming back to Iowa, so does money start coming back to Iowa Democrats. And all of a sudden, Iowa Democrats have a little bit more in the treasure chest, which they can play. And the more Iowa Democrats are in play, the worse that is for Iowa Republicans, because all of a sudden a lot more becomes competitive throughout the state. So there is this Republican's case for why Iowa Democrats should tell the party to go dive in a puddle. We're going to do what we want.
And to that point, there's not a lot of people that are suffering a lot right now by bucking whatever the political establishment says they should be doing. We're not really in an era of that right now.
There was one time that there was a political establishment in the Republican Party that said, oh, Trump is just a flash in the pan. He's not going to stick around. We're not going to give him the time of day. Well, those people are singing a much different tune right now.
Yeah. The rally cries aren't exactly fall in line and follow the leader these days, are they? Yeah, I mean, I think Althea and Todd, you guys both summed it up perfectly. It does seem to be largely basically a no-lose proposition. The only question is whether, I guess, as Democrats, Iowa Democrats feel they want to be first in the nation again. That's a separate argument that some within the party are having, whether they think the caucuses are something that they should focus on, and whether that the resources that Althea talked about are worth distracting from other party building business that they could be better focused. But that's a different argument from whether this is worth the shot. And like you said, that there's basically no downside to it. The delegate thing, Althea, you said perfectly, that's such a drop in the bucket, and otherwise the only ones who could get in trouble are the candidates. And so then, as you pointed out, it's a question of whether the candidates come here. Does the party step in and say you can't be in a debate if you go to Iowa, that kind of stuff? But or
does the National Party say we're not going to give your local candidates any help like we gave Caitlin Drey?
Yeah, exactly. So, but the argument, if you're for this thing, the argument is, hey, make them do that, make them say that, and see what kind of reaction they get to that. So it's going to be interesting.
I'm just going to sneak this in right here. I was kind of surprised, maybe even a little taken aback, when it was first announced that Iowa would be losing first in the nation status for the Democrat Party. How many Iowa Democrats actually said, let it go, it sucks?
Right.
That I was very surprised with, because as far as the manner in which Iowa code is written and the way Iowa primary elections are done, if Iowa did their presidential nominating, at least for Democrats, during a primary election, that would need to be in June, because that's when Iowa primary elections are, unless they move the primary election. That would set off a whole problem for elections officials who have, other contests to think about. I don't know if they really weren't considering the big picture, or if they were just so disgusted with how the 2020 caucuses turned out that they were ready to just cut loose the dead weight. But it was still very surprising how many people emailed me personally or made comments in public. This sucks, we're done with it. So there may be some roadblocks to first in the nation internally from Iowa Democrats.
Yep. All right.
I was just saying, Frank the Tank agrees, the dog in the background.
Yes, that was Frank the Tank. Sorry, he thought of the dog.
That's all right. There's always room for one more podcaster. As we go out here, I just wanted to reassure readers or listeners, by the way, that we on the On Iowa Politics podcast will never change our logo. It will stay the same wonderful classic logo that we've always had. Okay, anyways, that's it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. We hope it's been worth your time. Thanks for sticking with us. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice. We're on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. You can also find the podcast each and every week on your preferred Gazette or Lead newspaper website. Now that you listen to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox, you'll receive all the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today, so much great work that we talked about today, find it all on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, Sarah Watson, Jared McNett, Althea Cole, Todd Dorman, and our producer Bailey Sheehan, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.